Fundamentally, a building exists to make our lives better. It's really interesting to me how the way different people experience buildings. I mean, buildings are so tangible. We see them, we feel them. Unfortunately, I think we smell them sometimes, but sure, and so on. But we do know that buildings have an impact on people and therefore our businesses. And I think that for our conversation today, it would be good to put this into a little bit of context around what I refer to and many refer to as the changing nature of work. And so we know that the primary nature of work we perform in our workplaces has shifted over the last few decades. As our businesses rely more on knowledge work, the activities taking place in our buildings have changed, right? There's more collaboration across teams. We're working on more complex projects. And these things then require more feedback, more outsourcing, more social connections, right? And when you add in technology tools, like some of the ones Erik works with, we have much different physical workplace needs now than we did 30 years ago. And the choices we have made around the built environment in response to this may have led to some problems. One of the largest problems being noise disruption. We need to talk more to each other to get our work done, and that's a fact. But as the walls have come down to make collaboration easier, we haven't paid enough attention to cognitive work, right? That thought work, the work that requires concentration and therefore uninterrupted quiet. So we've gathered data over the last several years between 2013 and 2020, actually from 11 different credit unions now, covering 22 different buildings with 1,386 credit union staff respondents. Some of this data we collected in partnership with the Filing Research Institute, where Siku Burmese, who's one of their research fellows, and he's a professor at the University of North Carolina now, where he was using this data to look at the impact of the physical work environment on recruiting. We also have gathered this data as well, and we look at it from many different sorts of kind of trends and insights for the credit union industry. We've been making that data available to Filing along the way. We use a tool called the Leesman Index Survey, and I'm not going to get really deep into this, but it's a worldwide workplace experience survey. So it's a standardized tool that over 1 million workers around the world have taken, and that's used to collect data about people's experience in the workplace. And one thing I'll add here, I think that's important, is these 11 different organizations were not randomly selected, right? These are organizations that chose to take this survey, and they all were in somewhat of a similar frame of mind at that point. They were thinking about change or reconfiguring, renovating, building new workspaces, right? So there was a commonality between them in that they were likely in maybe somewhat older buildings or buildings that were kind of ready to be revamped. So I do want to point that out. So in our study, in the white paper we published earlier this year, we had 4 insights that I'm going to talk about today, and we're really just going to scratch the surface here. So much data collected, but so much information. We're just going to focus on these four insights. The first centers on choice in work settings. So many workers, and certainly not all, but many workers would benefit from the ability to select the most appropriate setting for completing the task at hand, right? So 45% of credit union workers in our survey showed a pretty complex portfolio of activities that they're taking on a regular basis. And our data shows that overall improvements around mobility and choice are correlated with improved satisfaction and improved productivity in the workplace. But credit unions weren't supporting mobility either inside the office or outside the office very well on average. I think this actually might be one of the largest areas where you'll see a gap between satisfaction with working from home and the corporate office. So that when you're working from home, you do have a bit more flexibility in choosing a setting, be it the couch, the kitchen table, an office, right, throughout the day. So our recommendation here is pretty simple. Focus on the activities that need to take place in your office to complete your work, and then conceive the most appropriate environments, settings, and tools. And then have a culture, support a culture that allows and embraces mobility. Make mobility acceptable. Friction's a funny thing. You know, you take these things one at a time, and many of these annoyances, you can just ignore them, but they tend to pile up and have kind of an overall drag on experience and engagement. And some of these, like interruption, noise disruption, can be really impactful to workers' sense of individual productivity. And we know when a worker does not feel that they are productive and there's impacts to their productivity, they will have a negative feeling or sentiment towards the entire experience in an office, regardless of how great, you know, your breakout team meeting rooms are, or how great your boardroom, your client engagement areas are. If they can't feel productive, they won't have a good experience in those areas. So again, pretty straightforward recommendation in this area. Identify the sources of friction and implement a plan to get rid of them. And I think you'll find that many of these friction areas are things you can get rid of possibly quite easily without a major change in the workplace. And by doing that, you give your employees the impression that you care and you're doing something immediately to improve the experience in the workplace, and not just waiting for some big project to come along. The impact that the physical work environment has on culture can be surprising, I think, to some people. But if you think about the easiest way people gather information, it's through your eyes. So if your loan department, for example, is working siloed off, heads down, processing loans, what kind of visibility does that team have to the mission of the credit union, to maybe forward moving initiatives that your team has? What we recommend here is that you pull the values out as a team that are most important to you and to your credit union, and think about ways that your building could do a better job in helping your leadership and your staff live those values. Well-being, it's another area, I think, where the contrasts between working at home and the corporate office can be pretty stark. And that's even if you set aside the kind of heightened awareness around well-being in the COVID-19 area, well-being is so important. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't get the basics right, if people aren't comfortable, they don't have fresh air, access to daylight, a pleasant surrounding, the ability to focus without noise interruptions, they're not going to be able to reach any sort of higher levels of innovation or performance. One statistic that's surprising that I think to a lot of folks is the one around general decor or aesthetics. But we know that aesthetics really does play a huge part in the way people experience the physical environment. So aesthetics have an impact on your mood, on stress, on your brain, right? So a more pleasant environment is less stressful for your brain, and it's easier for you to relax and recharge. Our recommendation on well-being is be methodical and be exhaustive. So really think about all of the ways a building and the built environment impact your team members, and find, again, kind of short-term and longer-term solutions or ways to impact those areas of well-being. There's a few resources out there, some guides. I think the most kind of all-encompassing one being the Well Building Standard, which is something that's administered by the United States Green Building Council. They're a group that administers LEED, so the environmental certification many of you might be aware of. So there's also a wellness certification that they help people administer for their buildings. And so now, I think, as I mentioned, the majority of our research is really centered around the corporate work environment, right? And then we dab a little bit into mobility. Now I'm going to pass the conversation on to Erik Anderson with Microsoft, and he's going to talk very much about their research around their team members' experience working from home in the COVID area.